The wrench slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the concrete driveway. I'd been under the hood of my father's old Ford pickup for the better part of an hour, trying to coax life back into the carburetor, when Arden's voice cut through the evening air like a rusty blade. "You're just trash that needs to be thrown away." She screamed it from inside the house, loud enough that Mrs. Patterson next door probably heard every word, loud enough that her precious friends gathered in our living room could witness her complete meltdown. I wiped my hands on an old rag and walked toward the front door, my work boots heavy on the wooden porch steps my grandfather had built 60 years ago. Through the screen door, I could see them all sitting there like vultures at a feast. Celine Marks perched on the edge of the leather recliner, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a wine glass. Janet Morrison sprawled across the couch, her designer purse clutched in her lap like a shield. 3 other women from Arden's law firm clustered near the fireplace, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and anticipation. Arden stood in the center of it all, her face flushed red with wine and rage, pointing at me like I was some kind of diseased animal that had wandered into her perfect little gathering. "Did you hear me, Beck?" she continued, her voice rising to a pitch that could shatter glass. "You're nothing but trash. White trash that belongs in a dumpster somewhere." I looked at her for a long moment, taking in the sight of my wife of 15 years completely losing her mind in front of her colleagues. Her auburn hair was disheveled, probably from running her fingers through it in frustration. Her expensive blouse was wrinkled, and there was a wine stain on her skirt that she hadn't noticed yet. "We'll see who gets thrown out," I said calmly. The room went quiet. Even Arden stopped her ranting for a moment, probably surprised that I hadn't taken the bait and started yelling back at her. That's what she wanted. A big scene, something that would justify whatever she was planning next. But I'd learned a long time ago that the best way to handle Arden when she was like this was to stay calm and let her dig her own grave. I walked past her into the kitchen, my boots echoing on the hardwood floors that my father had installed himself. The drawer next to the refrigerator stuck a little when I pulled it open. It had been doing that for years, and Dad always said he'd fix it someday. Inside, underneath a collection of takeout menus and old utility bills, was a manila folder containing copies of all the important documents for the house. The property deed was right on top, exactly where Dad had always kept it. I pulled it out and glanced at the names listed as owners: Robert James Darren and Margaret Ann Darren, my parents. Not a single mention of Arden Marie Darren anywhere on the document. I took my phone from my back pocket and dialed 911. "Police department," came the professional voice on the other end. "Hi, I need to report someone refusing to leave a private residence," I said, keeping my voice level and matter-of-fact. "I have a guest who's become hostile and won't leave when asked." "What's your address, sir?" I gave them the street address, spelled out my last name, and confirmed my father's name as the property owner. The dispatcher said they'd send someone over within 10 minutes. When I walked back into the living room, Arden was standing with her hands on her hips, glaring at me like I'd just committed some unforgivable sin. "Who were you calling?" she demanded. "The police," I said, settling back into my father's old recliner. "I asked them to remove a trespasser from my parents' property." The color drained from her face. "You wouldn't dare." "I just did." Celine leaned forward in her chair, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Beck, you can't be serious. This is Arden's home, too." I held up the property deed so everyone could see it. "Actually, it's not. This house belongs to Robert and Margaret Darren, has since 1987. Arden's name isn't on anything." Janet Morrison set down her wine glass with a sharp clink. "But you two are married. Doesn't that mean—" "It means she lives here at my discretion," I interrupted. "And right now I'm exercising my right to ask her to leave." Arden's face went through several different shades of red before settling on a deep purple that reminded me of an overripe eggplant. "You can't throw me out of my own house." "Watch me." The sound of a police cruiser pulling into the driveway cut through the tension in the room like a hot knife through butter. I stood up and walked to the front door, opening it wide as two officers approached the porch. The older one was a guy I recognized from the local diner, Officer Martinez, I think his name was. The younger one looked fresh out of the academy, all pressed uniform and nervous energy. "Evening, officers," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "I'm Beck. I called about the trespasser situation." Officer Martinez nodded and pulled out a small notepad. "Can you explain what's going on here, Mr. Darren?" I handed him the property deed and my driver's license. "This house belongs to my parents. My wife and I have been living here, but she's become hostile and abusive tonight in front of guests. When I asked her to leave, she refused." The younger officer glanced around the room, taking in the scene of 5 well-dressed women clutching wine glasses and staring at him like he was an alien who'd just landed in their living room. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said, addressing Arden, "I'm going to need you to step outside so we can discuss this situation." "I'm not going anywhere!" Arden shrieked. "This is my house! I live here!" "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and step outside with us," the younger officer said, his hand moving instinctively toward his belt. "We can sort this out, but you need to cooperate." "I'm not leaving. Beck, tell them this is ridiculous." I looked at her for a long moment, then shook my head. "Officer, she's refusing to comply with your request to step outside." That's when things got interesting. Officer Martinez moved toward Arden with the practiced ease of someone who'd dealt with difficult people before. "Ma'am, you can either walk outside with us voluntarily, or we can escort you out. Your choice." Arden looked around the room desperately, probably hoping one of her friends would jump to her defense. But Celine was suddenly fascinated by the contents of her wine glass, and Janet was studying her fingernails like they held the secrets of the universe. The other 3 women had somehow managed to disappear into the background, probably wishing they'd stayed home tonight. "Fine," Arden spat. "But this isn't over, Beck. This isn't even close to over." She stormed toward the door, the officers flanking her like an honor guard. The screen door slammed behind them with enough force to rattle the windows. For a moment, the living room was completely silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Then Celine cleared her throat delicately. "Well," she said, "that was certainly dramatic." I walked over to the front window and looked out at the scene unfolding on my front lawn. Arden was gesticulating wildly at the 2 officers, probably trying to convince them that I was the villain in this little drama. Officer Martinez was nodding patiently and taking notes, while his partner kept glancing back at the house like he was expecting me to come running out with an apology. "Is the house really yours?" Janet asked quietly. "My parents'," I corrected. "But yes, legally speaking, Arden has no claim to this property. We never got around to adding her name to the deed." "Where will she go?" one of the other women asked. I turned away from the window and shrugged. That's not my problem anymore. The truth was, I'd been planning this moment for months. Ever since I'd started noticing the late nights at the office, the mysterious phone calls, the way she'd started treating me like something she'd scraped off the bottom of her shoe. I'd been waiting for her to push things too far, to give me the excuse I needed to take action. Tonight, she'd finally crossed that line. Outside, I could hear Arden's voice getting higher and more desperate as the officers explained that she needed to leave the property. She was calling someone on her phone now, probably her sister or her mother, looking for someone to rescue her from the consequences of her own actions. "Beck," Celine said, standing up and smoothing down her skirt. "Maybe we should go. This seems like a family matter." "Sit down," I said, not bothering to look at her. "You're welcome to stay. In fact, I insist." I walked into the kitchen and pulled out my phone, scrolling through the contacts until I found the number for Tony's Pizza. It was almost 8 o'clock, and I figured everyone was probably getting hungry. "Tony's, this is Mike," came the familiar voice. "Hey Mike, it's Beck Darren. I need to place an order for delivery." "Sure thing, Beck. What can I get you?" 3 large pizzas, 1 pepperoni, 1 supreme, and one vegetarian. And throw in some of those garlic breadsticks. You got it. That'll be about 40 minutes. Perfect. I hung up and walked back into the living room, where the 5 women were sitting in uncomfortable silence. Through the window, I could see that Arden had moved to the sidewalk, still arguing with the officers and talking frantically on her phone. Pizza should be here in about 40 minutes, I announced, settling back into my father's chair. I figured you might be hungry. Celine blinked at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. You ordered pizza? Why not? It's been a long day. Janet leaned forward slightly. Beck, don't you think you should go out there and try to work this out with Arden? No, I said simply. She made her choice when she decided to call me trash in front of all of you. Now she gets to live with the consequences. Outside, the police officers were walking back toward their cruiser. Arden was following them, still talking, still gesticulating, but they were clearly done with the conversation. Officer Martinez said something to her that I couldn't hear, then got into the passenger seat. The younger officer paused at the driver's door and pointed toward the street, probably telling her she needed to leave the property entirely. The cruiser pulled away, leaving Arden standing alone on the sidewalk in front of the house. She looked back at the front door for a moment, then pulled out her phone again. She's calling someone else, I observed, more to myself than to the women in the room. Maybe her sister, Celine suggested, or her parents. Probably. I picked up the remote control and turned on the television, flipping through channels until I found a baseball game. Anyone want something to drink while we wait for the pizza? The women exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to handle this situation. They'd come here expecting a normal evening of wine and gossip, and instead, they'd witnessed what was probably the most dramatic domestic dispute of their lives. I'll take another glass of wine, Janet said finally. Same here, Celine added. I got up and walked into the kitchen, where Arden had left an open bottle of expensive red wine on the counter. I grabbed some clean glasses from the cabinet and brought everything back into the living room. So, I said, pouring wine for everyone who wanted it, how's everyone's week been? It was such a normal question, delivered in such a casual tone, that it seemed to break some kind of spell. The women began to relax slightly, settling back into their chairs and accepting the wine I offered. Busy, Janet said. We've got that big merger case coming up next month. The Henderson Industries thing? I asked. That's the one. Arden's been working on it for months. I nodded thoughtfully. She's mentioned it. A lot of late nights at the office, I'm sure. There was something in my tone that made Celine look at me sharply, but she didn't say anything. Outside, Arden had moved to the end of the driveway, where she was pacing back and forth while talking on her phone. Every few minutes, she'd look back at the house with an expression that could have melted steel. Is she going to be okay out there? One of the other women asked. She's a grown woman, I replied. She can figure it out. The pizza arrived exactly when Mike had promised. I paid the delivery guy and brought the boxes into the living room, setting them on the coffee table along with some paper plates and napkins. The smell of melted cheese and pepperoni filled the room, and I realized I was actually pretty hungry. Help yourselves, I said, opening the boxes. It was surreal, sitting there eating pizza with my wife's friends while she stood outside on the sidewalk, effectively homeless. But there was something satisfying about it too, something that felt like justice finally being served. Beck, Celine said carefully, what happens now? I took a bite of pizza and chewed thoughtfully before answering. Now Arden learns that actions have consequences. She wanted to call me trash in front of all of you, so she gets to find out what it feels like to be thrown away. But where will she stay tonight? She'll figure something out. She's got plenty of friends at the law firm, right? I'm sure someone will take her in. Through the window, I could see a car pulling up to the curb. Arden hurried toward it, probably relieved that her rescue had finally arrived. But as she reached for the door handle, the car pulled away, leaving her standing alone again. Ouch, Janet murmured. Looks like her first choice fell through, I observed. Arden pulled out her phone again, her movements becoming more frantic. She was probably working her way down a list of people, discovering that being someone's friend when times are good doesn't necessarily mean they'll be there when things get ugly. "This feels wrong," one of the other women said quietly. "Does it?" I asked. "She stood right here in this room and called me trash. She said I should be thrown away. All I did was take her advice and apply it to the right person." Celine set down her slice of pizza and looked at me directly. "Beck, we all know Arden can be difficult sometimes. But this seems extreme." "Extreme?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to know what's extreme? Being married to someone for 15 years and having them treat you like garbage in front of their friends. Being called trash in your own house by someone who contributes nothing to the mortgage, nothing to the upkeep, nothing to anything except criticism and complaints." The room went quiet again. Outside, another car had arrived, and this time Arden was actually getting into it. I couldn't see who was driving, but it didn't matter. She was someone else's problem now. "She's leaving," Janet observed. "Good." I finished my slice of pizza and reached for another one. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt genuinely relaxed. The constant tension that had been living in my shoulders was finally starting to ease. "So what now?" Celine asked. "Now we finish our pizza and you all go home," I said, "and tomorrow I start figuring out how to file for divorce." The women exchanged glances again, but nobody argued with me. They could see that my mind was made up, that this wasn't some temporary fit of anger that would blow over by morning. We ate, in relative silence after that, the baseball game providing background noise. When the pizza was gone and the wine bottle was empty, the women began gathering their purses and making polite excuses about early mornings and babysitters. Celine was the last to leave. She paused at the front door and turned back to me. "Beck, I hope you know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I replied. "For the first time in a long time, I know exactly what I'm doing." After she left, I locked the door and walked through the house, turning off lights and checking windows. Everything looked different somehow, like I was seeing it all with fresh eyes. This was my parents' house, the house I'd grown up in, the house where I'd learned how to be a man from my father and how to be kind from my mother. Arden had never understood that. She'd always seen it as a step down from where she thought we should be living, a reminder that she'd married beneath her station. But to me, it was home in the truest sense of the word. I walked into the bedroom and looked at Arden's side of the closet, still full of expensive clothes and shoes. She'd have to come back for those eventually, but that was a conversation for another day. Tonight, I was just going to enjoy the silence. I changed into an old t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants, then went back out to the living room and settled into my father's chair. The baseball game was still on, and the home team was winning. Everything felt exactly as it should be. For 15 years, I'd been walking on eggshells around Arden, trying to keep the peace, trying to make her happy, trying to be the husband she wanted me to be. But tonight, she'd finally pushed too far, and I'd pushed back. She'd called me trash, said I needed to be thrown away. Well, now she knew how it felt to be on the receiving end of that particular sentiment, and honestly, it felt pretty good. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my phone buzzing like an angry wasp on the nightstand. The sun was streaming through the bedroom windows, and for a blissful moment, I'd forgotten about everything that had happened the night before. Then I saw Arden's empty side of the bed, and it all came flooding back. The phone buzzed again. I picked it up and saw 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. Most were from Arden, but there were a few from her sister Patricia and one from her mother that just said, "Call me immediately." I deleted all of them without reading the rest. The coffee maker in the kitchen gurgled to life on its timer, filling the house with the rich aroma that had been my morning ritual for as long as I could remember. I poured myself a cup and walked out onto the back porch, where I could see Mrs. Patterson hanging laundry on the line in her yard. "Morning, Beck," she called over the fence. "Everything all right over there? I thought I heard some commotion last night." "Just a disagreement with Arden," I replied. "Nothing to worry about." She nodded knowingly. Mrs. Patterson had been living next door for 30 years, and she'd seen her share of domestic disputes over the decades. She was also one of the few people in the neighborhood who'd never been particularly impressed by Arden's airs and graces. "She staying somewhere else for a while?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Permanently, I hope." That got her attention. She paused in her laundry hanging and looked at me more carefully. "You two splitting up?" "Looks that way." "About time," she said bluntly. "That woman never deserved you, Beck. Your parents would be spinning in their graves if they knew how she'd been treating you." My parents had passed away within 6 months of each other 3 years ago. Dad went first, a heart attack at 68, and Mom followed with what the doctors called a stroke, but I knew was really a broken heart. They'd been married for 45 years and had never spent more than a night apart. They'd never liked Arden much, though they'd been too polite to say so directly. But I could see it in the way Mom's smile never quite reached her eyes when Arden was around, and the way Dad would find excuses to be somewhere else when she started complaining about the house or the neighborhood or my job. "They tried to warn me," I admitted. "I should have listened." "Live and learn," Mrs. Patterson said philosophically. "You're still young enough to start over." I was 42, which didn't feel particularly young, but I appreciated the sentiment. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message a few minutes later. "Mr. Darren, this is Amanda Foster from Foster, Kellerman and Associates. I represent your wife, Arden Darren. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss the dissolution of your marriage and the division of assets." I laughed out loud. Arden had wasted no time in lawyering up, probably hoping to intimidate me into letting her back into the house. What she didn't realize was that I'd been expecting this move for months and had already done my homework. I called my own attorney, a guy named Tom Bradley, who'd handled my parents' estate and had been practicing family law in town for over 20 years. "Beck," Tom said, when his secretary put me through. "I heard through the grapevine that you and Arden might be having some troubles." "The grapevine works fast," I replied. "But yeah, we're done. She moved out last night, and I expect she'll be filing for divorce soon if she hasn't already." "What happened?" I gave him the abbreviated version of the previous evening's events. Tom listened without interrupting, occasionally making small humming sounds that I'd learned meant he was processing information. "So she's already retained counsel?" he asked when I finished. "Amanda Foster." "I know Amanda. She's competent, but not particularly creative. Probably going to try the standard playbook. Claim you're abusive, go after half the house, demand alimony. Can she do that?" "She can try, but the house is in your parents' names, not yours, which complicates things significantly. And if you inherited it, which I assume you did based on the will we drafted, then it's separate property, not marital assets." I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. "So she can't force me to sell it or give her half?" "Not unless she can prove she contributed significantly to its value through improvements or mortgage payments. Did she?" "Not a dime. I've been paying all the household expenses since we moved in. She kept her money for her car payments and shopping. That's good for us. What about other assets? Joint bank accounts, retirement funds, that sort of thing?" "We kept separate accounts. Her choice, actually. She said she didn't want to deal with my blue-collar budgeting methods." Tom chuckled. "She might have just made our job a lot easier. Email me copies of all your financial records, and I'll start putting together a response to whatever Amanda files." After I hung up with Tom, I spent the next hour gathering bank statements, tax returns, and other financial documents. It was tedious work, but it felt good to be taking action instead of just reacting to whatever Arden threw at me. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time, it was Wheels Wheeler, my best friend since high school, and the only person I'd told about my suspicions regarding Arden's extracurricular activities. "Heard you finally grew a backbone," he said without preamble. "Word travels fast in this town." Janet Morrison's husband plays poker with my brother-in-law. Apparently she came home last night with quite a story to tell. Wheels ran a small auto repair shop on the other side of town, the kind of place where men gathered to drink coffee and solve the world's problems while their cars got fixed. It was also the unofficial headquarters of the local gossip network, at least for anyone who didn't travel in Arden's social circles. "What's the word on the street?" I asked. "Mixed reviews. Some folks are saying you went too far, throwing your wife out in front of her friends like that. Others are saying it's about time someone put Arden Darren in her place. What do you think?" "I think she's been asking for it for years, and you finally gave it to her. Question is, what's your next move?" That was a good question. I'd been so focused on getting Arden out of the house that I hadn't really thought beyond that immediate goal. "I guess I wait and see what she does," I said. "That's your first mistake," Wheels replied. "You can't just play defense here, Beck. She's going to come at you hard, try to make you look like the bad guy. You need to get ahead of the story." "What do you mean?" "I mean you need to start talking to people. Tell your side of things before she gets a chance to spin it her way. And you might want to think about what other ammunition you've got in your back pocket." He was right, of course. Arden was a lawyer, trained in the art of persuasion and manipulation. If I let her control the narrative, I'd end up looking like an abusive husband who'd thrown his poor, defenseless wife out into the street for no reason. "You still got those photos?" Wheels asked quietly. I'd almost forgotten about the photos. 3 weeks ago, I'd followed Arden to what she'd claimed was a work dinner, only to see her going into the Riverside Inn with Mitch Caro, one of the senior partners at her firm. I'd sat in my truck for 2 hours, taking pictures with my phone when they finally came out looking disheveled and satisfied. "Yeah, I've got them. Might be time to share those with a few select people, just to make sure everyone knows why you really threw her out." After Wheels hung up, I sat in my father's chair and thought about what he'd said. Part of me wanted to take the high road, to let the divorce proceed quietly without airing our dirty laundry in public. But another part of me, the part that was still angry about being called trash in front of Arden's friends, wanted to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person she really was. My phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from Celine Marks. "Beck, I hope you're okay. What happened last night was intense. Call me if you need someone to talk to." I stared at the message for a long moment. Selena had always been friendly to me, more so than most of Arden's other friends. She was divorced herself, had been for about 5 years. And sometimes I'd caught her looking at me with what I thought might be sympathy, when Arden was being particularly cruel. On impulse, I called her back. "Beck," she said, answering on the second ring. "I'm so glad you called. I've been worried about you." "I'm fine," I said. "Better than fine, actually." "Are you sure? Last night was pretty dramatic. I keep thinking about Arden standing out there on the sidewalk." "She made her choice, Celine. I just gave her what she asked for." There was a pause. "Beck, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Have you been happy? I mean, really happy with Arden?" It was an unexpectedly direct question, and it caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I've known Arden for 10 years, and I've watched how she treats you. The way she talks about you when you're not around. The way she dismisses everything you say or do. It's not right, Beck. A wife shouldn't treat her husband like that." I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of tension I hadn't even realized was there. "She talks about me when I'm not around?" "Not in a good way," Celine said quietly. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but she's always complaining about you. Your job, your clothes, your friends, this house. She acts like she's doing you some kind of favor by staying married to you." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I like you, Beck, You're a good man, and you deserve better than what Arden's been giving you. I've wanted to say something for years, but it wasn't my place." We talked for another 20 minutes, and by the time I hung up, I had a much clearer picture of how Arden really felt about our marriage. According to Celine, my wife had been complaining about me to anyone who would listen for years, painting herself as a long-suffering saint, married to a disappointing loser. That evening, I drove over to Murphy's Tavern, the local bar where a lot of the working-class guys from the neighborhood gathered after their shifts. I wasn't much of a drinker, but I needed to get out of the house, and I wanted to test the waters of public opinion. The moment I walked in, the conversation at the bar stopped. Everyone turned to look at me, and I could see the curiosity in their eyes. News of my domestic drama had clearly made the rounds. "Beck," called out Jimmy Morrison, Janet's husband. "Heard you had some excitement at your place last night." "You could say that," I replied, taking a seat at the bar. The bartender, a guy named Steve, who'd been pouring drinks at Murphy's for as long as I could remember, set a beer in front of me without being asked. "On the house," he said with a grin, "for services to the community." That got a laugh from the other patrons, and I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. These were my people, the guys I'd grown up with, the ones who'd known me long before I'd married Arden and started trying to fit into her world. "So is it true?" asked Mike Kowalski, a plumber who lived a few streets over. "You really threw her out?" "The police threw her out," I corrected. "I just called them." "Same difference," Jimmy said. "About time someone put that woman in her place. The way she's always acted around here, like she's too good for the neighborhood." "Remember when she tried to get the city to shut down Murphy's?" added another voice from the back of the room. "Said it was bringing down property values?" I'd forgotten about that. It was about 3 years ago, right after my parents died. Arden had started a petition to have Murphy's liquor license revoked, claiming the bar was attracting an undesirable element to the neighborhood. It had gone nowhere, but it hadn't endeared her to the locals. "She never understood this place," I said, taking a sip of my beer. "Never understood the people." "But you do," Steve said. "You're one of us, Beck. Always have been." I stayed at Murphy's for about 2 hours, nursing my beer and listening to the guys share their own stories about difficult wives and messy divorces. It was therapeutic in a way, being reminded that I wasn't the first man to find himself in this situation, and I wouldn't be the last. When I got home, there was a car in my driveway that I didn't recognize. As I pulled up behind it, Arden got out of the passenger seat, followed by a man in an expensive suit who I assumed was her lawyer. "Beck," Arden said as I walked toward the front door. "We need to talk." "No, we don't," I replied, fishing my keys out of my pocket. "Mr. Darren," the lawyer said, stepping forward. "I'm Richard Foster, representing your wife. We're hoping we can resolve this situation amicably." "There's nothing to resolve," I said. "Arden doesn't live here anymore." "Beck, please," Arden said, and I was surprised to hear something that might have been desperation in her voice. "I made a mistake last night. I was upset. I'd had too much wine. I didn't mean what I said." I looked at her for a long moment. She was wearing different clothes than the night before, and her hair was perfectly styled again. She'd obviously spent the night somewhere with access to a full wardrobe and bathroom. "Where did you stay last night?" I asked. She hesitated. "With Patricia." Her sister lived about an hour away, which explained why it had taken so long for someone to pick her up. It also meant that Arden had spent the night explaining to her family why her husband had thrown her out of the house. "Good," I said. "You can stay there while we work out the divorce." "Beck, you're being unreasonable," the lawyer interjected. "Mrs. Darren has a right to her personal belongings, at the very least." "I'm not stopping her from taking her things," I said, "but she's not moving back in." "This is my home, too," Arden snapped, and there was the anger I was more familiar with. "I've lived here for 15 years. As a guest, I reminded her. A guest who overstayed her welcome. Richard Foster cleared his throat. Mr. Darren, I should inform you that we're prepared to file for divorce and seek temporary spousal support, as well as a court order allowing Mrs. Darren to return to the marital home. Good luck with that, I said, unlocking the front door. My lawyer says you don't have a leg to stand on. We'll see about that, Arden said coldly. I paused in the doorway and turned back to face them. You know what, Arden? You're right. We will see. And when we do, everyone's going to know exactly what kind of person you really are. I went inside and locked the door behind me, leaving them standing in the driveway. Through the front window, I watched them have a heated conversation next to their car. Arden was gesticulating wildly again, probably angry that her lawyer hadn't been able to intimidate me into submission. After they left, I called Tom Bradley and left a voicemail updating him on the evening's events. Then I poured myself a glass of my father's old bourbon and settled into his chair to think about what came next. Arden had made her move, bringing in a lawyer and trying to pressure me into letting her back into the house. But I wasn't the same man who'd been walking on eggshells around her for the past 15 years. Last night had changed something fundamental in me, had reminded me that I didn't have to accept being treated like garbage in my own home. She'd called me trash and said I needed to be thrown away. Now she was about to learn what it really meant to be discarded. The divorce papers arrived on Thursday morning, delivered by a nervous-looking process server who apologized 3 times for bothering me. I signed for the envelope and read through the documents over my morning coffee, impressed, despite myself, by the creativity of Arden's legal strategy. According to the petition, I was an emotionally abusive husband who had subjected my poor wife to years of psychological torment before finally escalating to physical intimidation and unlawful eviction. The filing requested temporary spousal support, half of all marital assets, and exclusive use of the marital home pending the outcome of the divorce proceedings. It was complete fiction, but it was well-crafted fiction. I called Tom Bradley and read him the relevant sections over the phone. Standard playbook, he said when I finished. Paint you as the abuser, claim she's the victim, hope the judge buys it long enough to get her back in the house. Can she prove any of this? She doesn't have to prove it at the temporary hearing. She just has to make it sound plausible. But we've got some advantages she doesn't know about yet. Such as? The house, for starters. I pulled the deed and the probate records yesterday. The property transferred to you automatically when your parents died, which makes it separate property under state law. She can't touch it. What about her other claims? That's where things get interesting. I did some checking on Mrs. Darren's employment history. Did you know she's been having an affair with Mitch Caro? I nearly dropped the phone. How did you find out about that? So you knew? I suspected. I even have some photos. Excellent. Because adultery is still grounds for divorce in this state, and it can affect spousal support awards. If we can prove she was cheating, her request for alimony goes out the window. Tom explained that we'd have a hearing in 2 weeks to address Arden's temporary motions. In the meantime, he advised me to document everything, avoid any contact with Arden that wasn't absolutely necessary, and start gathering evidence of her affair. And Beck? He added before hanging up. Be careful. If she's willing to lie about abuse in court documents, she might be willing to lie about other things too. That afternoon, I drove over to Wheel's garage to fill him in on the latest developments. I found him under the hood of a vintage Mustang, cursing creatively at a stubborn carburetor. Legal troubles? He asked when I told him about the divorce papers. She's claiming I'm abusive. Wheels straightened up and wiped his hands on a greasy rag. That's a serious accusation, Beck. You got any witnesses who can contradict that? Her friends were there the other night. They saw how she was acting, heard what she said to me. Think they'll testify on your behalf? I thought about the 5 women who'd been in my living room, eating pizza while Arden stood outside on the sidewalk. Some of them might. Celine seemed sympathetic. What about the photos you took? Tom thinks they'll help with the spousal support issue. Wheels nodded thoughtfully. You know, there might be other ways to use those photos. Ways that don't involve the courtroom. What do you mean? I mean, Mitch Caro's got a reputation to protect. He's a partner at a prestigious law firm, probably married, maybe has kids. Might be willing to make some concessions to keep his personal life private. I hadn't thought about that angle. You're suggesting I blackmail him? I'm suggesting you level the playing field. Arden's already playing dirty by lying about abuse. Maybe it's time you stop playing by the rules, too. That evening, I sat in my father's chair and thought about what Wheels had said. I'd always prided myself on being an honest, straightforward person. I paid my taxes, kept my word, and tried to treat people fairly. But Arden had abandoned those principles the moment she decided to have an affair, and then lie about it in court. Maybe it was time for me to adapt my strategy. I pulled up the photos on my phone and studied them carefully. They were taken from across the parking lot of the Riverside Inn, but they clearly showed Arden and Mitch entering the motel together and leaving 2 hours later. Mitch's face was clearly visible in several shots, and his license plate was readable in others. I did a quick internet search and found Mitch's home address, along with some interesting information about his family. He was married to a woman named Catherine, and they had 2 teenage children. His wife was active in several local charities and served on the board of the country club. On impulse, I created a fake email account and sent Mitch a message with one of the photos attached. Mr. Caro, I think we need to have a conversation about your relationship with Arden Darren. I'll be at Murphy's Tavern tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Come alone. I signed it, a concerned observer, and hit send before I could change my mind. The next evening, I arrived at Murphy's early and claimed a table in the back corner where I could see the entrance. The usual crowd was there: Jimmy Morrison, Mike Kowalski, a few other guys from the neighborhood. They nodded in my direction, but left me alone, probably sensing that I wasn't in a social mood. Mitch arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, looking around nervously before spotting me in the corner. He was shorter than I'd expected, maybe 5'8", with the soft build of a man who spent his days behind a desk. His expensive suit looked ridiculously out of place in Murphy's Tavern. "You must be Beck," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "And you must be the man who's been sleeping with my wife." He flinched slightly but maintained eye contact. "I don't know what you think you know, but—" I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photos. "I know you've been meeting Arden at the Riverside Inn every Thursday for the past 2 months. I know you paid for the room with a credit card, and I know your wife Catherine doesn't know anything about it." The color drained from his face. "What do you want?" "I want you to convince Arden to drop her ridiculous claims about me being abusive. I want you to tell her to accept a simple no-fault divorce with no spousal support, and I want you to stay away from my wife until this is all resolved." "I can't control what Arden does," he said weakly. "Sure you can. You're a partner at her firm. You have influence over her career. Use it." Mitch shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "And if I refuse?" I showed him another photo, this one clearly showing his license plate. "Then your wife gets copies of all these photos, along with the credit card receipts I pulled from the motel. Your partners at the firm get copies too. I'm sure they'll be very interested to learn that one of their senior associates is having an affair with a subordinate." "You're threatening me." "I'm offering you a choice. Help me resolve this quietly or deal with the consequences of your actions becoming public knowledge." Mitch sat in silence for several minutes, staring at his hands. Finally, he looked up at me. "Arden's not going to like this." "That's not my problem. You got yourself into this situation when you decided to sleep with a married woman. Now you get to help me get out of it." "What guarantee do I have that you won't release those photos anyway?" "You don't," I said honestly. "But if you help me end this divorce quickly and quietly, I have no reason to destroy your marriage. If you don't help me, I have every reason to make your life as miserable as possible." He left Murphy's without ordering a drink, probably heading straight to Arden's temporary residence to break the bad news. I stayed for another hour, nursing a beer, and feeling oddly satisfied with how the conversation had gone. I'd never blackmailed anyone before, but it was surprisingly easy once you abandoned any pretense of moral superiority. The next morning, I got a call from Tom Bradley. "Interesting development," he said. "I just heard from Amanda Foster. Apparently your wife wants to modify her divorce petition." "What kind of modifications?" "She's willing to drop the abuse allegations and the request for spousal support. She still wants half the house, but she's open to negotiating." "What changed her mind?" "She didn't say, but Amanda seemed surprised by the sudden shift in strategy. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" "I might have had a conversation with someone who helped clarify the situation." Tom was quiet for a moment. "Beck, I need to ask you this directly. Did you threaten anyone or do anything that could come back to bite us later?" "I had a civilized conversation with a mutual acquaintance. No threats were made, no laws were broken." "Good, because if Arden's backing down on the abuse claims, we're in a much stronger position. I can probably get her to accept a clean break. She keeps her personal property and whatever's in her bank accounts, you keep the house and your assets." "What about the affair?" "If she's not asking for spousal support, we might not need to bring it up. Sometimes the best victory is the one that doesn't require you to fire all your ammunition." After hanging up with Tom, I walked out to the backyard and sat on the old wooden swing my father had built when I was a kid. The morning was crisp and clear, and I could hear Mrs. Patterson humming to herself as she worked in her garden. For the first time since this whole mess started, I allowed myself to believe that it might actually work out in my favor. Arden was backing down, Mitch was neutralized, and I was going to keep the house that had been in my family for decades. My phone buzzed with a text message from Celine. "Heard through the grapevine that things might be looking up for you. Want to grab coffee sometime and talk about it?" I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Sure. How about this afternoon?" We met at a small cafe downtown, away from the neighborhoods where we might run into mutual acquaintances. Celine was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a large coffee and what looked like a slice of chocolate cake. "You look better," she said, as I sat down across from her. "I feel better. Turns out standing up for yourself is good for the soul." I heard Arden's dropping some of her demands. Word travels fast. Faster when it involves someone as unpopular as Arden. Celine took a sip of her coffee. "Can I tell you something, Beck? Something I probably should have said years ago?" "Go ahead." "Arden's been talking about leaving you for at least 2 years. She's been complaining to anyone who would listen about how unhappy she is, how she deserves better, how she's wasting her life being married to you." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't think you'd believe me, and because I wasn't sure you were ready to hear it." She leaned forward slightly. "But I think what happened the other night changed something in you. You're not the same man who used to let her walk all over you." "No, I'm not." "Good, because that man deserved better than what he was getting." We talked for another hour, and I found myself genuinely enjoying Celine's company. She was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly honest about the dysfunction in Arden's social circle. She also made it clear that she was interested in seeing me again, once the divorce was finalized. "I know it's too soon to think about dating," she said as we prepared to leave, "but when you're ready, I hope you'll consider giving me a call." "I will," I said, and meant it. That evening, I was cleaning up the dinner dishes when someone knocked on the front door. I opened it to find Arden standing on the porch, alone this time, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. "No." "Beck, please, I need to talk to you." "We can talk out here." She glanced around nervously, probably worried about the neighbors overhearing. "I want to apologize for the other night, and for the things I said in the divorce papers." "Okay." "That's it? Just okay?" What do you want me to say, Arden? That I forgive you? That I understand? That we can work things out? Maybe, I don't know. She wrapped her arms around herself, looking cold despite the mild evening. I've been thinking about what I said, about calling you trash. That was cruel and unfair. Yes, it was. I was angry and hurt, and I lashed out, but I didn't mean it. I looked at her for a long moment, this woman I'd been married to for 15 years, and felt nothing but a mild sense of pity. The problem, Arden, is that you did mean it. Maybe not in that exact moment, but you've been thinking it for years. You've been telling your friends that I'm not good enough for you, that you deserve better, that you're wasting your life with me. Her eyes widened slightly. Who told you that? Does it matter? The point is, you've made your feelings clear. You think I'm trash and you want something better. Well, now you're free to find it. Beck, I made mistakes. I know that. But we can work through this if we both try. No, we can't, because I don't want to work through it. I don't want to spend the rest of my life with someone who sees me as a disappointment. Tears started running down her cheeks, but they didn't move me the way they might have a week ago. What about our marriage? What about the life we built together? What life? The one where you stayed out late and lied about where you were? The one where you criticized everything I did and complained about everything I provided? The one where you called me trash in front of your friends? She didn't have an answer for that. Go home, Arden, I said gently. Go back to Patricia's house, or wherever you're staying, and start figuring out what you want your new life to look like. Because this one is over. I closed the door and walked back to the kitchen, where I finished cleaning the dishes in peaceful silence. Outside, I could hear Arden's car starting up and driving away. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. 3 weeks later, I was standing in the courthouse lobby waiting for Tom Bradley when Arden walked in with her lawyer. She looked different somehow, thinner, more fragile, like she'd been living on coffee and stress for the past month. Which, knowing Arden, she probably had been. Beck, she said, approaching me cautiously. How are you? I'm well, I replied. You look tired. I haven't been sleeping much. She glanced around the busy lobby, where other people were dealing with their own legal dramas. This whole thing feels surreal. It doesn't have to be complicated, I said. Tom tells me your lawyer's been reasonable about the settlement terms. Yes. Well, I decided that fighting wasn't going to help anyone. I wondered if Mitch had been as persuasive as I'd hoped, but I didn't ask. Some victories were better left unexamined. Tom arrived a few minutes later, carrying a thick folder of documents. Ready to get this over with? He asked. The hearing itself was surprisingly anticlimactic. Judge Harrison, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, reviewed the settlement agreement and asked a few perfunctory questions about our assets and debts. Arden agreed to take her personal belongings, her car, and her retirement account. I kept the house, my truck, and my own savings. No spousal support, no accusations of abuse, no drama. The court finds the settlement agreement to be fair and equitable, Judge Harrison announced. The marriage of Arden and Beck Darren is hereby dissolved. Just like that, 15 years of marriage were reduced to a legal stamp and a file number. Outside the courthouse, Arden lingered by the steps while her lawyer hurried off to another appointment. I was walking toward my truck when she called my name. Beck, wait. I turned around. What is it, Arden? I wanted to thank you for not making this harder than it had to be. You mean for not bringing up your affair with Mitch? She flinched like I'd slapped her. You knew about that? I've known for months. Then why didn't you use it against me in court? I thought about that for a moment. Because it wouldn't have changed anything. You still would have been the woman who called me trash in front of your friends. You still would have been the woman who spent years complaining about our marriage to anyone who would listen. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for all of it. I know you are, But sorry doesn't fix anything, Arden. It just makes you feel better about the damage you've already done. I left her standing there and drove home to the house that was now officially, legally, completely mine. That evening, Wheels came over with a six-pack of beer and a congratulatory grin. How does it feel to be a free man? Expensive, I said, thinking about the legal bills. But worth it. We sat on the back porch and watched the sun set over the neighborhood I'd grown up in. Mrs. Patterson was watering her flowers, and I could hear kids playing in the park a few blocks away. Everything felt normal and peaceful in a way it hadn't for years. So what's next? Wheels asked. I'm thinking about some renovations. Maybe finish the basement, update the kitchen. This place has good bones, but it could use some modernizing. I meant with your personal life. Oh. I took a sip of beer. Celine and I are having dinner tomorrow night. Celine Marks? Arden's friend? Former friend, I think. Turns out she never liked Arden much either. Wheels laughed. That's perfect. Nothing like dating your ex-wife's enemy to really twist the knife. She's not Arden's enemy. She's just someone who saw through Arden's act and got tired of pretending otherwise. Same difference. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and saw it was from Mitch Caro. Heard about the divorce. Glad it worked out for everyone. I showed the message to Wheels, who grinned wickedly. Think he's relieved? Probably. His marriage is safe, his career is intact, and he doesn't have to deal with Arden's drama anymore. What about Arden? She's still working at the firm? As far as I know, though I imagine things are pretty awkward for her there. Good. Maybe she'll learn something from all this. I doubted that, but it wasn't my problem anymore. The next evening, I took Celine to a nice restaurant on the other side of town, somewhere we were unlikely to run into anyone from Arden's social circle. She looked beautiful in a simple black dress, and I found myself wondering why I'd never really noticed her before. Because you were married, she said when I voiced that thought, and because you're a decent man who doesn't look at other women when he's committed to someone. Even when that someone is treating him like garbage? Especially then. It's one of the things I've always admired about you, Beck. Your integrity. We talked about everything and nothing, our jobs, our families, our hopes for the future. It felt natural and easy in a way that conversations with Arden hadn't for years. Celine listened when I spoke and asked thoughtful questions. She laughed at my jokes and shared stories of her own. Can I ask you something? She said over dessert. Sure. Do you regret any of it? The marriage, the divorce, the way it all ended? I thought about that for a moment. I regret wasting 15 years on someone who didn't appreciate what we had. But I don't regret standing up for myself when she crossed the line. Good, because you handled it perfectly. You could have gotten ugly, could have tried to destroy her completely, but you took the high road. Did I? I'm not sure blackmailing her boyfriend counts as the high road. Celine raised an eyebrow. You blackmailed Mitch? I had photos of them together. I may have suggested that his wife and business partners might be interested in seeing them. That's not blackmail. That's justice. Mitch knew the risks when he decided to sleep with a married woman. You just reminded him of the consequences. After dinner, I walked Celine to her car and kissed her goodnight. It was a gentle, tentative kiss, but it held the promise of something more. I'd like to see you again, I said. I'd like that too. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. The house was quiet and peaceful, exactly the way I liked it. I poured myself a glass of my father's bourbon and sat in his old chair, thinking about the past month and everything that had changed. A year ago, I'd been trapped in a marriage with a woman who saw me as a disappointment and a burden. I'd been walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace, accepting treatment that no man should have to accept. Now I was free. The house was mine, my future was my own, and I was dating a woman who actually seemed to enjoy my company. Arden had called me trash and said I needed to be thrown away. In the end, she'd been right about someone needing to be discarded. She'd just been wrong about who. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered it anyway. Hello? Beck? It's Patricia. Arden's sister sounded upset about something. Hi, Patricia. What can I do for you? It's about Arden. She's not doing well. I'm sorry to hear that, but she's not my responsibility anymore. I know. But she's been staying with me for over a month now, and she's just falling apart. She barely eats, she doesn't sleep, she cries all the time. I think she's having some kind of breakdown. I felt a flicker of sympathy, but it was quickly overwhelmed by a much stronger emotion. Indifference. Have you suggested she see a therapist? She won't listen to me. She keeps saying she made the biggest mistake of her life, that she threw away the best thing that ever happened to her. Patricia, I appreciate you calling, but there's nothing I can do to help Arden. She made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. But Beck, she loves you. She realizes that now. No, she doesn't. She loves the idea of not being alone, of not having to face the consequences of her actions. That's not the same thing as loving me. Patricia was quiet for a moment. So there's no chance of reconciliation? None whatsoever. I see. Well, I had to try. After she hung up, I sat in the quiet house and thought about what Patricia had said. Part of me felt bad for Arden, but a larger part of me recognized that this was exactly what needed to happen. She'd spent years taking our marriage for granted, treating me like I was disposable, assuming I'd always be there no matter how badly she behaved. Now she was learning what life looked like without that safety net. I finished my bourbon and went to bed, sleeping peacefully in the center of a mattress that was now entirely my own. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee the way I liked it, strong and black, without the fancy flavored creamer Arden had always insisted on. I sat on the back porch and watched the sunrise, planning out my day. I had a date with Celine that evening, a home improvement project to start on the weekend, and a whole future to figure out. For the first time in years, all of those things felt like opportunities rather than obligations. My phone buzzed with a text from Celine. Good morning, looking forward to tonight. I texted back, me too. And I meant it. After 15 years of walking on eggshells around someone who saw me as trash, I was finally free to be myself again. It felt better than I'd remembered. Arden had gotten exactly what she'd asked for. I'd been thrown away. She'd just been too short-sighted to realize that sometimes being discarded is the best thing that can happen to a person. It gives you the chance to find out what you're really worth. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was installing new kitchen cabinets when someone knocked on the front door. I set down my drill and walked through the house, wiping sawdust from my hands. Through the peephole, I could see a woman I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, well-dressed, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she was here on unpleasant business. Can I help you? I asked through the door. Mr. Darren? My name is Catherine Caro. I think we need to talk. Mitch's wife. I opened the door and gestured for her to come in. Nice house, she said, looking around the living room. Very homey. Thank you. What can I do for you, Mrs. Caro? She sat down on the edge of the couch, her purse clutched tightly in her lap. I know about my husband's affair with your ex-wife. I see. I found some credit card statements he'd tried to hide. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, things like that. When I confronted him, he told me everything. I waited for her to continue. He also told me about your conversation at Murphy's Tavern, about the photos you have. What about them? I want to see them. That surprised me. Why? Because I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. Mitch says it was just a physical thing, that it didn't mean anything. But I need to see for myself. I studied her face, trying to read her intentions. She seemed calm and determined, not hysterical or angry. Mrs. Caro, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Those photos might be more painful than helpful. Please. I've been living with half-truths and evasions for months. I need to see the whole picture. I got my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken outside the Riverside Inn. She looked at each one carefully, her expression never changing. "They look happy," she said finally. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I needed to see this." She handed the phone back to me. "Mitch has been trying to convince me that it was a mistake, that he was going through some kind of midlife crisis. But look at their faces in these pictures. They're not acting like people who made a mistake." "What are you going to do?" "I'm filing for divorce next week. I just wanted to thank you first." "Thank me?" "For not releasing these photos publicly. Mitch told me you could have destroyed his career, humiliated our family, made everything much worse than it had to be. But you chose not to. I got what I wanted without having to destroy anyone else's life. Still, I appreciate your restraint." She stood up and smoothed down her skirt. "I hope you're doing well, Mr. Darren. From what I've heard, you handled a difficult situation with more grace than most people would have managed." After she left, I went back to work on the kitchen cabinets. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I was building something new and better, the affair that had helped end my marriage was now destroying another family. But that wasn't my responsibility. I'd given Mitch a chance to end things quietly, and apparently he'd chosen to continue the relationship even after our conversation. The consequences were his to deal with. That evening, Selene came over with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine. We'd been seeing each other regularly for 3 months now, and I was constantly amazed by how easy and comfortable our relationship felt. "How's the kitchen coming along?" she asked, surveying my work. "Slowly, but surely. Should be finished by the end of the month. It's going to be beautiful. Your father would be proud." I'd told Selene about my parents, about growing up in this house, about all the memories embedded in these walls. She understood why I'd fought so hard to keep it. "Catherine Caro came by today," I said as we unpacked the food. "Mitch's wife? What did she want?" I told her about the conversation, about Catherine's request to see the photos. "Good for her," Selene said. "She deserves to know the truth about what her husband was doing." "Do you think I should have shown her the photos?" "Absolutely. She's an adult, and it's her marriage. She had a right to make an informed decision about her future." We ate dinner on the back porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson waved from her garden, and I waved back. She'd become something of a surrogate grandmother to me since my parents died, always checking to make sure I was eating properly and taking care of myself. "I have some news," Selene said as we finished the wine. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news, I think. I got a job offer from a firm in the city. Better pay, more responsibility, a chance to specialize in corporate law." I felt my stomach drop. "Congratulations. When would you start?" "That's the thing. I haven't accepted yet. I wanted to talk to you first." "Why?" "Because it would mean moving about an hour away. We could still see each other on weekends, but it wouldn't be the same as it is now." I thought about that for a moment. We'd never talked about the future of our relationship, had never made any commitments beyond enjoying each other's company. But the thought of her leaving made me realize how much she'd come to mean to me. "Is this what you want to do?" I asked. "Career-wise, yes, it's a great opportunity." "Then you should take it." "Just like that?" "Just like that. I'm not going to ask you to give up your dreams for me, Selene. I've seen what happens when people feel trapped in relationships that hold them back." She smiled and reached across the table to take my hand. "This is why I'm crazy about you, you know. Most men would try to talk me out of it." "I'm not most men." "No, you're not." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and watching the stars come out. Finally, Selene spoke again. "What if I asked you to come with me?" "To the city?" "Why not? You're a mechanical engineer. There are plenty of opportunities there. You could sell this place. Start fresh somewhere new." I looked around the backyard where I'd played as a child, at the house my parents had loved, at the neighborhood that had shaped who I was. "I can't," I said finally. "This is home." "I understand." "Do you? Because I don't want you to think I'm choosing a house over you." "I don't think that. I think you're choosing to be true to yourself, which is exactly what you should do." We made love that night with a tenderness that felt like both a beginning and an ending. I knew she was going to take the job, and I knew our relationship would probably end when she moved away. But I also knew that what we'd shared had been real and meaningful, even if it wasn't permanent. The next morning, she was gone when I woke up, but there was a note on the pillow. "Thank you for everything. You helped me remember what it feels like to be with a good man. Don't settle for anything less than someone who sees how special you are." I made coffee and sat on the back porch, thinking about the past year and everything that had changed. I'd lost a wife who'd never really loved me and gained a sense of self-respect I'd forgotten I possessed. I'd had a brief but meaningful relationship with a woman who'd reminded me that I was worth loving. Most importantly, I'd learned that being alone wasn't the same thing as being lonely. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Tom Bradley's number. "Morning, Beck. Hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all. What's up?" "I just got an interesting call from Amanda Foster. Apparently, Arden wants to modify the divorce settlement." "What kind of modifications?" "She's asking for visitation rights to the house." I laughed out loud. "Visitation rights? To a house?" "That's what I said. Amanda claims Arden has sentimental attachment to the property and would like to visit occasionally to maintain her connection to the memories you shared there. Tell Amanda that Arden can drive by on the public street anytime she wants, but she's not setting foot on this property ever again." "That's what I figured you'd say. I just wanted to check." After Tom hung up, I shook my head in amazement. Even 6 months after the divorce, Arden was still trying to find ways to insert herself back into my life. The woman who'd called me trash and said I should be thrown away now wanted visitation rights to my house. Some people never learned. I spent the rest of the morning working on the kitchen cabinets, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of measuring, cutting, and installing. This was what I'd always loved about construction work, the satisfaction of building something solid and lasting with your own hands. Around noon, Mrs. Patterson knocked on the back door. "Beck, honey, I made too much soup again. Want to come over for lunch?" I'd been living on takeout and frozen dinners since Celine left, so homemade soup sounded perfect. Mrs. Patterson's kitchen was exactly the way I remembered it from childhood, warm and welcoming, filled with the smell of fresh bread and simmering vegetables. She ladled soup into 2 bowls and set out a plate of sandwiches. "You've been quiet lately," she observed. "Everything all right?" "Celine took a job in the city. She moved away last week." "I'm sorry to hear that. She seemed like a nice girl." "She is. But sometimes things don't work out, even when both people are good." Mrs. Patterson nodded knowingly. "Your father used to say that timing is everything in life. The right person at the wrong time is still the wrong person. Dad was a smart man. He was, and he raised a smart son." She reached across the table and patted my hand. "You'll find the right person when you're ready, Beck. Don't rush it." That afternoon, I was back to work on the cabinets when another unexpected visitor arrived. This time, it was Jimmy Morrison, looking uncomfortable and fidgety. "Hey, Beck, got a minute?" "Sure, what's on your mind?" "It's about Janet. She's been acting weird lately, asking a lot of questions about you and Arden." "What kind of questions?" "Whether you're dating anyone, if you're planning to sell the house, stuff like that. I think she might be interested in you herself." That was unexpected. "Janet? Your wife Janet?" "Yeah. I think watching you stand up to Arden impressed her. She keeps talking about how you're a real man who knows how to handle difficult women." I didn't know what to say to that. "Look, I'm not accusing her of anything," Jimmy continued, "but I wanted to give you a heads up. If she starts coming around here with casseroles and offers to help with the renovations, you'll know what's really going on. Thanks for the warning. No problem. Just thought you should know. After Jimmy left, I sat in my father's chair and thought about the strange turns my life had taken. 6 months ago, I'd been married to a woman who treated me like garbage. Now I had ex-wives of cheating husbands thanking me for my discretion, neighbors' wives apparently developing crushes on me, and my actual ex-wife requesting visitation rights to my house. It would have been funny if it weren't so absurd. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. This is Patricia. Arden asked me to contact you. She wants to know if you'd be willing to meet for coffee to discuss some unresolved issues. I typed back, there are no unresolved issues. The divorce is final. She says it's important. Then she can discuss it with her lawyer. Please, Beck. She's really struggling. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then typed, her struggles are not my problem. Don't contact me again. I blocked the number and went back to work on the kitchen. Whatever issues Arden thought needed resolving, she was going to have to work through them on her own. I'd already given her 15 years of my life and 6 months of divorce drama. She wasn't getting another minute. The sun was setting by the time I finished installing the last cabinet door. I stood back and admired my work. Solid oak cabinets with brass hardware, perfectly aligned and professionally finished. It was the kind of kitchen my mother had always wanted, but never got to see. I opened a beer and walked out to the back porch, where I could see the lights coming on in houses throughout the neighborhood. Families were gathering for dinner, kids were being called in from playing outside, and life was continuing its normal, peaceful rhythm. This was what I'd fought for when Arden tried to take the house away from me. Not just the building itself, but the sense of belonging and continuity it represented. The knowledge that I was part of something larger than myself, connected to the past and responsible for the future. Arden had never understood that. To her, the house was just a piece of real estate, something to be traded up from when better opportunities arose. She'd never grasped that some things couldn't be measured in square footage or market value. My phone rang, and I saw Wheel's name on the caller ID. Hey, stranger, how's the kitchen coming along? Just finished the cabinets. Want to come over and see? On my way. 20 minutes later, Wheels was standing in my kitchen, running his hands over the new cabinets and nodding approvingly. Beautiful work, Beck. Your old man would be proud. That's what everyone keeps telling me. Because it's true. He opened and closed one of the cabinet doors, testing the hinges. So what's next? New countertops? Eventually. I'm thinking about doing the bathroom next, then maybe finishing the basement. Sounds like you're planning to stay put for a while? This is home, Wheels. I'm not going anywhere. We sat on the back porch with our beers, talking about the renovations and catching up on neighborhood gossip. It felt good to have a friend who understood why this place mattered so much to me. Heard Celine moved to the city, Wheels said eventually. Yeah, new job opportunity. You okay with that? I'm okay with it. She's doing what's right for her career. And you're doing what's right for you. Exactly. Wheels finished his beer and stood up to leave. You know what I like about you, Beck? You've got your priorities straight. You know what matters and what doesn't. After he left, I sat alone on the porch for a while longer, listening to the familiar sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed, a mother called for her children to come inside. These were the sounds of home, of belonging, of a life lived in the right place with the right values. Arden had called me trash and said I needed to be thrown away. But she'd been wrong about everything that mattered. I wasn't trash. I was a man who knew his own worth, who understood the difference between what was valuable and what was merely expensive. I was someone who kept his word, treated people fairly, and built things that lasted. And most importantly, I was someone who refused to be discarded by people who didn't understand what they were throwing away. The kitchen renovation was finished, But the real reconstruction, the rebuilding of my self-respect and sense of purpose, had been completed months ago, the night I'd called the police and watched Arden get escorted off my property. Everything else was just details. I finished my beer and went inside, locking the door behind me and turning off the lights one by one. Tomorrow I'd start planning the bathroom renovation, maybe call a few contractors for estimates on new countertops. But tonight, I was just going to enjoy the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do, with exactly the people who deserved my time and attention. For the first time in years, that felt like more than enough.